The Valkyrie warship moved through the darkness of space like a predator hunting for prey. And Commander Kethis stood at the viewing window with his forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the endless stars pass by his ship. His vessel was called the Scourge of Silence, and it was one of the finest warships in the entire Valkyrie Dominion. A massive thing of metal and power that had destroyed dozens of enemy ships over the years. Kethis was proud of his command, proud of his species, and proud of the empire that had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. The years that the empire that had ruled this sector of the empire that had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Valkyrie were tall beings with gray skin that looked like stone, and they had 4 arms and eyes that glowed a soft yellow in the dim light of their ships. They believed themselves to be the greatest species in the known universe, and for a long time, nobody had been able to prove them wrong. "Commander," one of his officers called out, "we are detecting a small vessel drifting near the edge of the contested zone." Kethis turned slowly and walked toward the main screen, his heavy boots making loud sounds against the metal floor. "Show me," he commanded. The screen flickered and displayed a tiny ship floating without power through the void, spinning slowly like a dead leaf falling from a tree. "What species does it belong to?" Kethis asked. "According to our records, it appears to be a human vessel." "Commander." Kethis made a sound of disgust deep in his throat because the Valkyrie did not think much of humans at all. We're a young species from a small planet called Earth, and they had only recently started exploring beyond their own solar system. Humans are weak creatures, Kethis said to his officers, with soft skin and only 2 arms and brains that are barely worth mentioning. The other Valkyrie on the bridge laughed at their commander's words because they all agreed with him completely. "Should we destroy the vessel, Commander?" The weapons officer asked eagerly. Kethis thought about it for a moment, but then another idea came to his mind. "No," he said slowly. "Scan the ship for life signs first." The scan took only a few seconds, and the results surprised everyone on the bridge. "Commander, there is one life sign aboard the vessel, and it appears to be alive but weak." Kethis smiled, and it was not a kind smile at all. "A living human would make an excellent gift for the High Lords back home," he said. "They have been wanting new specimens for their menageries, and a real human would be quite the trophy." He gave the order to bring the damaged ship into the cargo bay, and within the hour, his soldiers had retrieved the human from the wreckage. They dragged the creature onto the bridge so that Kethis could see it with his own eyes. And what he saw did not impress him at all. The human was a male with dark hair and skin that was brown like dirt, and he was covered in cuts and bruises from whatever accident had damaged his ship. He wore simple clothes that were torn and dirty, and he looked up at the Valkyrie surrounding him with eyes that showed no fear at all. This small detail bothered Kethis, but he pushed the feeling aside. "What is your name, creature?" Kethis demanded. The human coughed, and then spoke in a voice that was rough but steady. "My name is Marcus Cole," the human said, "and I was a cargo hauler before my ship lost power." "A cargo hauler," Kethis repeated with amusement. "So you are not even a warrior, but merely a carrier of goods." "I used to be a soldier," Marcus replied, "but that was a long time ago." Kethis leaned down to look more closely at the human, and he noticed something strange in the creature's eyes. There was a sharpness there, a kind of intelligence that seemed to be watching and measuring everything around him. But Kethis dismissed this observation because surely no human could be truly intelligent. "Take him to the cells," Kethis ordered his guards. "Keep him alive and healthy, because damaged goods are worth less to the High Lords." The guards grabbed Marcus roughly and began to drag him away. But the human did not struggle or cry out. He simply let them take him. And as he was pulled through the doorway, he looked back at Kethis one more time. That look stayed with the commander for reasons he could not explaining the cells below the main deck. Marcus was thrown into a small room with metal walls and a hard floor. The door slammed shut behind him with a loud clang, and he was left alone in the darkness. But Marcus did not panic or despair because he had been in worse situations before. During his years as a soldier on Earth, he sat down against the wall and began to think. During the short time he had been on the bridge, he had noticed many things that the Velthari probably thought he was too stupid to see. He had noticed how the commander spoke to his officers with respect, but spoke to the servants with complete contempt. He had noticed how the servants kept their eyes down and their bodies hunched, as if they were afraid of being noticed. He had noticed the fear in their movements and the way they flinched whenever a warrior walked past them. This told Marcus that the Velthari had a caste system, a society divided into different levels, where some were considered better than others, and in his experience, such systems always had cracks that could be exploited by someone patient enough to find them. For now, he would watch and learn and wait for the right moment. The days passed slowly in the cell, and Marcus spent his time observing the guards who brought him food and water. They were all from the warrior caste, proud and cruel and completely convinced of their own superiority. They mocked him through the bars and threw his food on the floor just to watch him pick it up. Marcus never reacted to their cruelty because he knew that showing anger would only make things worse. Instead, he stayed calm and quiet and watched everything with careful eyes. On the 5th day of his captivity, something different happened. A young Velthari came to his cell in the middle of the night cycle when the corridors were empty and quiet. This one was smaller than the warriors, with lighter gray skin and eyes that looked more nervous than proud. Marcus could tell immediately that this was not a warrior but a servant, one of the lower caste members he had seen on the bridge. The young Velthari looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then he pushed a small bundle through the bars of the cell. "Food," the servant whispered. "Better food than they give you." Marcus took the bundle and opened it to find fresh fruit and clean bread, things far better than the slop the warriors had been feeding him. He looked up at the young servant with genuine curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus asked quietly. The servant seemed surprised by the question, as if he had not expected the human to speak to him like an equal. "I do not know," the servant admitted. "Maybe because you are a prisoner like we are, just in a different kind of cell." Marcus nodded slowly because he understood exactly what the young Velthari meant. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. The servant hesitated, clearly shocked that anyone would care enough to ask. "I am called Rin," he finally answered. "Thank you." "Rin," Marcus said, and he meant it with all his heart. Those 3 words seemed to strike Rin like a physical blow, and his yellow eyes went wide with something that looked like wonder. "No one of higher status has ever thanked me before," Rin whispered. "Then they are fools," Marcus said simply, "because kindness should always be acknowledged." Rin stared at the human for a long moment, and something changed in his expression. It was a small change, barely visible, but Marcus saw it clearly. It was the first tiny spark of hope in eyes that had known nothing but despair for their entire life. Rin left quickly after that, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor like a ghost. But he came back the next night, and the night after that, bringing food and eventually staying to talk. Marcus listened to everything Rin told him about the Velthari Dominion, about the castes and the laws and the countless injustices that the servant class endured every single day. And as he listened, Marcus began to form a plan. He did not know yet where this path would lead him, but he knew that he would not remain a prisoner forever. Velthari had made a terrible mistake when they decided to capture him instead of killing him. They saw a weak human in a cage, but they did not see the soldier underneath. They did not see the strategist who had won battles against impossible odds back on Earth. They did not see the man who had learned long ago that the greatest weapon in any war was not a foe's gun or a ship, but an idea and ideas, as Marcus knew very well, could not be kept in cages. 2 months had passed since Marcus Cole became a prisoner on the Scourge of Silence, and in that time he had learned more about the Valkyrie than they could have ever imagined. Rin came to visit him almost every night, bringing food and stories and information that Marcus stored carefully in his mind like pieces of a puzzle. He learned about the rigid caste system that divided Valkyrie society into warriors at the top and servants at the bottom. He learned about the 10,000 years of tradition that kept the lower castes in chains of fear and obedience. He learned about the punishments that awaited any servant who dared to speak against their masters, and he learned that despite all of this cruelty, there was still hope burning quietly in the hearts of those who had been told they were worthless. Marcus also spent his days watching the warriors who guarded his cell, studying their movements and their habits and their weaknesses. He noticed that they were excellent at fighting enemies they could see and understand, but they became confused and frightened when faced with anything unexpected. Their training had taught them how to follow orders perfectly, but it had not taught them how to think for themselves. This was useful information, and Marcus filed it away for later one night. Rin came to the cell with terror in his eyes and his hands shaking badly. "Something is wrong," Rin whispered. "Something is very wrong on this ship." Marcus moved closer to the bars and listened carefully. "Tell me everything," he said. Rin explained that the ship had passed through a strange nebula 3 days ago, a cloud of gas and dust that glowed with an eerie purple light. Since then, crew members had been disappearing during the sleep cycle, and those who were found had been completely drained of all life. Their bodies were hollow shells with expressions of pure horror frozen on their faces. "The warriors are scared," Rin continued. "Even Commander Kethis does not know what to do." Marcus felt his heart beat faster, but not from fear. This was an opportunity, and he knew he could not let it pass. "Bring me to the commander," Marcus said firmly. Rin looked at him like he had lost his mind completely. "That is impossible," Rin protested. "They would kill me for even talking to you like this." "Tell them that I know what is hunting the crew," Marcus said. "Tell them that I have seen something like this before." Rin hesitated, but Marcus could see that the young Valkyrie was desperate enough to try anything. "Please, Rin," Marcus added softly, "I can help, but only if they let me." Rin disappeared into the corridors, and Marcus waited in his cell with patient calm. He did not actually know what was attacking the ship, but he had a good guess based on what Rin had described. More importantly, he knew that the Valkyrie would have no idea how to fight something that did not follow the rules of their traditional warfare. Hours later, the cell door opened and 4 heavily armed warriors surrounded Marcus with weapons pointed at his chest. "The commander wishes to speak with you." "Human," one of them growled. "Make one wrong move and we will end your life." Marcus simply nodded and let them lead him through the ship toward the bridge. What he saw along the way confirmed his worst fears about the situation. Servants huddled in corners with terror in their eyes while warriors marched back and forth with no clear purpose, bodies covered in sheets lined one of the corridors, at least a dozen of them waiting to be processed. The entire ship smelled of fear, a sharp and sour scent that filled every room and hallway on the bridge. Commander Kethis stood in the center of chaos as his officers shouted reports and demanded orders. When Marcus was brought before him, the commander looked at the human with a mixture of disgust and desperate hope. "The servant says you know what is killing my crew," Kethis said bluntly. "Speak now, or I will have you thrown out of the airlock." Marcus kept his voice calm and steady as he replied. "You picked up something when you passed through that nebula," he said. "A parasitic creature that feeds on living beings during the darkness of the sleep cycle." "How do you know this?" Kethis demanded. "Because humans have encountered similar creatures before," Marcus lied smoothly. We learned how to fight them through trial and error. This was not entirely true, but Marcus had read enough science fiction and studied enough biology to make educated guesses about what they were facing. "Tell me how to kill it," Kethis ordered. Marcus shook his head slowly. "I cannot just tell you," he said. "I need to be free to move around the ship and set traps and coordinate the response." Kethis laughed. But there was no humor in the sound. "You expect me to unchain a prisoner and give him free run of my vessel? I expect you to choose between your pride and the lives of your crew." Marcus replied simply. The bridge went silent as everyone waited to see how the commander would respond to such bold words from a lowly human. Kethis stared at Marcus for a long moment, and Marcus could see the internal battle playing out behind those glowing yellow eyes. Pride fought against fear, and in the end, fear won. "Remove his restraints," Kethis ordered through gritted teeth. "But if this is some kind of trick, I will make sure your death lasts for days." Marcus rubbed his wrists where the chains had left. Markson then got to work immediately. He asked for volunteers from the crew to help him search the ventilation shafts where he suspected the creature was hiding. The warriors all stepped back and looked away, unwilling to face an enemy they could not see or understand. But the servants stepped forward, a dozen of them led by Rin himself. "We will help you," Rin said quietly. "We are not afraid to die if it means saving the ship." The warriors muttered insults about the cowardice of the lower castes. But Marcus saw the truth clearly. It was not cowardice that kept the warriors back, but the inability to adapt to a situation. Their training had never prepared them for servants who had spent their lives surviving through cleverness and quick thinking. Were far better suited for this kind of fight. Marcus organized them into teams and taught them how to build simple traps using materials from the ship. He showed them how to create noisemakers that would alert them to movement. In the shafts, he gave them welding torches and told them to aim for any dark mass that moved toward them. Then he led the hunt himself, crawling through the narrow ventilation tunnels with a torch in one hand and a metal pipe in the other, for 3 days and 3 nights. Marcus did not sleep at all. He moved through the ship like a ghost, tracking the creature through the sounds it made and the trails it left behind. He found the bodies of its latest victims and used them to predict where it would strike next. The Veltari warriors watched in amazement as this small human did what none of them had the courage to do. Finally, on the 3rd night, Marcus cornered the creature in a storage room deep in the belly of the ship. It was a horrible thing to look at, a mass of shadow and teeth and hunger that seemed to absorb the light around it. The creature lunged at Marcus with terrifying speed, but he was ready. Four-eyed, dove to the side and swung the welding torch in a wide arc, catching the creature with a blast of fire that made it scream in a voice that was not of this world. The fight was brutal and desperate, and Marcus took wounds that would have killed a dove's lesser man, but he kept fighting with the fierce determination that humans had carried within them since the days when they hunted mammoths with nothing but spears and courage. In the end, Marcus stood over the burning remains of the creature with blood running down his arms and a wild look in his eyes. He had won. When he emerged from the storage room, he found half the ship waiting for him in the corridor. The servants stared at him with something that looked like worship in their eyes. Even the warriors seemed impressed, though they tried to hide it behind masks of indifference. Ren pushed through the crowd and threw his arms around Marcus, and the human hugged him back without hesitation. "You did it," Rin whispered. "You saved us all," Marcus smiled wearily and replied. "We did it together, my friend." That night, as the ship finally settled into peaceful sleep, the servants gathered in small groups and whispered a word that had not been spoken for centuries. They called Marcus Velcor, which meant one who leads in the ancient tongue of their people. It was a title that had not been given to anyone outside the warrior caste in 10,000 years, but the servants did not care about tradition. Anymore, they had seen something new. Something that changed everything they believed about the universe. They had seen a human treat them as equals, fight beside them as brothers, and give them credit for a victory. That was just as much theirs as it was his, and that simple act of respect sparked something dangerous in their hearts. It sparked hope, Commander. Kethis watched the servants celebrate their strange new hero and felt the first stirrings of unease in his stomach. He had unleashed something he did not understand, and deep down he knew that nothing on this ship would ever be the same again. The Scourge of Silence arrived at the Velthari homeworld after 3 more weeks of travel through the darkness of space. Marcus stood at the viewing window of his cell and watched as the planet grew larger and larger before his eyes. It was a world of gray mountains and black oceans, beautiful in a cold and harsh way that seemed to match the nature of its people. Commander Kethis had returned Marcus to his cell after the creature was destroyed. But the treatment had changed in subtle ways. The guards no longer threw his food on the floor, and some of them even nodded at him when they passed by. His buzzword had spread throughout the ship about what the human had done, and even the proudest warriors could not deny his courage. But Kethis remained troubled by the way the servants looked at Marcus, by the whispers of Velcor that echoed through the lower decks. He wanted the human off his ship as quickly as possible, before anything else could go wrong. The shuttle that carried Marcus down to the planet's surface was filled with armed guards, but Rin had managed to slip aboard as a servant assigned to carry supplies, caught Marcus's eye, and gave a small nod that promised they would meet again somehow. Capital city of Ascendancy Prime was a monument to Velthari power, with towers that stretched toward the sky like fingers reaching for the stars. Everything was built from dark stone and gleaming metal, designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Marcus was led through streets filled with Velthari who stopped to stare at the strange alien walking among them. Most of them had never seen a human before, and they pointed and laughed at his soft skin and his 2 arms and his strange flat face. Marcus ignored them all and kept his attention on the massive building at the center of the city. It was the Hall of Echoes, the seat of the High Council that ruled the entire Dominion. This was where he would face the most powerful beings in Velthari society, and this was where his real test would begin. The High Council consisted of 12 ancient Velthari who had ruled for centuries and believed themselves to be almost like gods. They sat on thrones made of black crystal, looking down at the small human who stood before them with his hands bound and his clothes still torn from his battle with the creature. So, this is the animal that killed the Shadow Beast, one of the High Lord said with amusement in his voice. It does not look like much, another added. Perhaps the stories were exaggerated. Marcus remained silent and let them talk, studying each of them with the same careful attention he had given to everything since his capture. He saw pride and cruelty in their faces, but he also saw something else. He saw fear hiding behind their arrogant words, a deep and ancient fear of anything that might threaten their power. The head of the council, a massive Velthari with scars covering half his face, leaned forward on his throne and spoke directly to Marcus. "You have provided some entertainment for our people, human," he said, "and for this we are prepared to reward you. We offer you a place in the royal menagerie," another High Lord continued, "a comfortable cage with regular meals and the honor of being displayed before visitors. You will live out your days in luxury," a third added, "which is far better than anything your primitive species deserves." Marcus waited until they had finished speaking, and then he did something that shocked everyone in the Great Hall. He laughed. Sound echoed off the stone walls and high ceiling, a human sound in a place that had never heard such a thing before. The High Lords stared at him with confusion and growing anger as he continued to laugh at their generous offer. "Forgive me," Marcus finally said as his laughter faded, "but I must decline your hospitality." "Decline?" The scarred High Lord repeated. You are a prisoner, human. You do not have the right to decline anything. Perhaps, Marcus agreed. But I also have information that your High Council needs to hear, whether you want to hear it or not. What could a primitive creature like you possibly know that would interest us? One of the lords sneered. Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak in a voice that carried to every corner of the Hall of Echoes. I know that your empire is dying, he said calmly. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. I know that you have rebellions on 7 of your outer colonies that your warriors have failed to crush. Several of the High Lords shifted uncomfortably on their thrones. I know that your economy depends entirely on the labor of a servant class that you treat worse than animals. Rin, who had managed to enter the hall with a group of other servants, felt his heart pound in his chest. I know that you have made enemies of every species you have ever encountered, and that those enemies are gathering strength at your borders. The scarred High Lord rose from his throne with fury blazing in his eyes. Enough of this nonsense, he shouted. Guards, silence this creature. And I know, Marcus continued loudly, not backing down even as the guards moved toward him, that your precious dominion will collapse within a single generation. And the cause will not be invasion from outside. He paused and looked directly into the eyes of the most powerful Velthari in the universe. The cause will be the millions of servants who have finally realized that they do not have to accept the chains you have placed upon them. The guards grabbed Marcus and forced him to his knees. But he had already said everything he needed to say. What the High Council did not realize was that his words were being broadcast to the entire planet. A sympathetic technician in the communication center, a servant who had heard the stories from the Scourge of Silence, had opened every channel so that Marcus's speech could be heard by billions in homes and workplaces across the Velthari homeworld. Servants stopped what they were doing and listened to the human's words. They heard him speak about their worth, about their strength, about the power they held but had never known how to use. They heard him describe the cracks in the empire that their masters had always hidden from them, and, for the first time in 10,000 years, they began to believe that change was possible. The High Council was furious when they discovered what had happened. But it was already too late. The words had spread across the planet and were now traveling to every world in the Dominion at the speed of light. Marcus was dragged back to a cell. This time a dark and cold room deep beneath the Hall of Echoes, but he went with a smile on his face because he knew that the seed had been planted 2 days later. Rin was arrested for his part in helping the broadcast reach the people. The High Council decided to make an example of him. A public execution to show what happened to servants who forgot their place. Marcus was brought to witness the punishment, forced to watch as the young Velthari who had shown him kindness was led onto a platform. Before a crowd of thousands, Rin looked out at the masses with no fear in his eyes. And when he saw Marcus in the crowd, he smiled. Remember what I said about hope? Rin called out in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. It cannot be killed, even if you kill the one who carries it. The execution was swift, and Marcus watched it all without looking away. He owed Rin that much at least, to bear witness to his courage and his sacrifice. As the crowd dispersed and Marcus was taken back to his cell, something changed inside him. The patient strategist who had been content to watch and wait was gone, replaced by something harder and colder. Rin had believed in him, had risked everything to help him speak to the people, and Marcus would not let that sacrifice be in vain. In his dark cell beneath the Hall of Echoes, Marcus began to plan in earnest. He would bring down this empire if it took the rest of his life. He would give the servants the tools they needed to free themselves, and he would make the High Council pay for every drop of blood they had spilled. The Velthari thought they had crushed the rebellion before it could begin by killing one brave young servant, but they had made a terrible mistake. They had made Marcus Cole angry, and they had shown the entire Dominion that the High Lords were afraid. Fear and anger, Marcus knew, were the two most powerful forces in any revolution. The Veltari had just provided both. All that remained now was to fan the flames. 6 months had passed since Rin's execution, and the Veltari Dominion was crumbling from the inside like a tree rotted at its core. Marcus Cole remained in his cell beneath the Hall of Echoes, but the walls of that prison could not contain the revolution he had started. Guards, who were secretly sympathetic to the servant, carried his messages to the outside world. Written on scraps of cloth and memorized word for word, former servants who had escaped the outer colonies became his generals, spreading his teachings to every corner of the empire, and those teachings were unlike anything the Veltari had ever encountered before. Marcus did not preach violence or call for armed uprising against the warrior caste. He understood that the servants could never win a direct fight against soldiers who had trained their entire lives for battle. Instead, he taught them a different kind of warfare, one that used their greatest strengths against their master's greatest weaknesses. Do not fight their warriors, his messages said. Control the food, control the fuel, control the information. Make them need you, and then make them see you. The servants listened, and they began to act on the industrial planet of Kareth 9. The workers in the fuel refineries simply stopped working one day. They did not protest or make demands because they just stayed in their quarters and refused to come out. The warriors had no idea how to run the refineries themselves, and within a week, the planet's fuel production had dropped and nothing. Ships could not launch because there was no one to load the cargo. Communication networks went dark because there was no one to maintain the equipment. Factories fell silent because there was no one to operate the machines. The warrior caste had spent 10,000 years believing that the servants were worthless, and now they were discovering just how wrong they had been. The High Council ordered brutal crackdowns on any servant who refused to work. But this only made things worse. Every execution created 10 more rebels, and every act of violence spread the message further that the masters were cruel and desperate. Marcus watched the reports that his allies smuggled into his cell, and he felt something that might have been pride growing in his chest. The servants were doing this themselves, using their own courage and determination to shake the foundations of an empire. He had given them the idea, but they were the ones making it real. On the 342nd day of his imprisonment, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. The door to his cell opened, and Commander Kethis walked in, looking nothing like the proud warrior who had captured him so long ago. His uniform was wrinkled and stained. His eyes were tired and red, and he moved with the heaviness of someone carrying a weight too great to bear. You have destroyed everything, Kethis said quietly as he stood before Marcus. I destroyed nothing, Marcus replied. I only showed your servants what was already true. And what truth is that? Kethis demanded. Marcus stood and faced the commander with no fear in his eyes. That they are not worthless, he said simply. That they have value and dignity and the right to be treated with respect. Kethis laughed bitterly and shook his head. You speak of respect as if it is some kind of weapon, he said. It is the most powerful weapon in the universe. Marcus replied, more powerful than any ship or army or empire. The commander was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could see the struggle playing out behind his tired eyes. This was a being who had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of his caste, and now that belief was crashing down around him. How? Kethis finally asked. How did you do this, one human against billions of Veltari? Marcus sat back down and gestured for Kethis to join him after a moment of hesitation. The commander lowered himself to the floor and sat across from his prisoner. Your empire has something that humans evolved past a long time ago, Marcus explained. A belief that some thinking beings are lesser than others. This is simply the natural order, Kethis replied automatically. But there was doubt in his voice now. There is nothing natural about it, Marcus said. It is a lie that the powerful tell themselves, to justify their cruelty. He leaned forward and spoke with quiet intensity. Every species that has ever achieved greatness has done so not by crushing those beneath them, but by lifting them up. Humans work together across differences of color and language and belief, because we learned that cooperation makes us stronger. Your servants are not your enemies, Commander. They are your greatest resource, and you have wasted them for 10,000 years. Kethis stared at Marcus as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You really believe this? He said with wonder in his voice. I know it, Marcus replied. Because I have seen what happens when people are treated with dignity. They become capable of amazing things. Things that would be impossible if they were kept in chains of fear and hatred. The commander sat in silence for a very long time, and Marcus let him think without interruption finally. Kethis spoke again, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. What would you have me do? Marcus felt hope surge in his heart, but he kept his expression calm. Help me, he said. Help me build something better from the ashes of what is falling. You know the warrior caste better than anyone. You can show them that there is another way. Kethis looked at the walls of the cell and then back at Marcus. They will call me a traitor, he said. History will call you a hero, Marcus replied. The first of the old order to see the truth and act on it. Another long silence stretched between them. And then Kethis did something that shocked Marcus completely. He reached out and unlocked the chains that bound the human's wrists. I must be losing my mind, Kethis muttered as the chains fell away. Or perhaps you are finally finding it, Marcus suggested with a small smile. They left the cell together, the human prisoner and the Velthari commander, walking side by side through corridors that had never seen such a thing before. The guards they passed stared in confusion, but Kethis waved them aside with the authority he still commanded. News of Marcus Cole's release spread through the capital like wildfire, and by the time they reached the streets outside the Hall of Echoes, a crowd had already gathered. Servants pressed forward to see the human who had given them hope, and warriors hung back with uncertainty written on their faces. Marcus climbed onto a platform where all could see him and raised his hands for silence when he spoke. His voice carried across the square and into the countless devices that broadcast his words to the stars. I am not your savior, he declared. I am just a man who reminded you of something you already knew in your hearts. You have the power to change your world, and you have proven that over these past months. But destruction alone is not enough. We must also build something worthy to take the place of what is falling. He looked out at the faces before him, servant and warrior alike, and saw the same question in all their eyes. I am asking you to imagine a future where your children are judged not by the caste of their birth, but by the content of their character. A future where every thinking being has the right to live with dignity and purpose. This future is possible, but only if we create it together. He stepped down from the platform and walked into the crowd, and no one tried to stop him. A young servant girl approached him with tears streaming down her face and asked a question that echoed across the planet. Will you lead us, Valkor? Marcus knelt down to meet her eyes and took her small gray hands in his. I will walk beside you, he said gently. But the steps you take must be your own. She nodded and smiled. And that smile was the most beautiful thing Marcus had seen since leaving Earth. The revolution was no longer his alone. It belonged to every being in the Dominion who had ever dreamed of something better, and together, they would make that dream a reality. 1 year had passed since Marcus Cole was first captured by the Velthari, and in that time the universe had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The old dominion was gone, swept away by a revolution that had spread from planet to planet like a cleansing fire. In its place rose something new. A coalition government where servants and warriors worked side by side as equals. High lords who had surrendered were given a choice between adapting to the new order or living out their days in exile on distant worlds. Most of them chose exile because they could not imagine a life where they were not superior to everyone around them, but a few of the younger ones stayed, fascinated by this strange new society and curious about what it might become. The Hall of Echoes, once the seat of tyranny and oppression, had been transformed into a place of gathering and celebration. Its dark stone walls were now covered with colorful banners from every species that had been freed from Belthari rule, Calvari and Morthax and Durrani. Peoples who had been conquered centuries ago now walked freely through the capital as honored guests, and in the center of all this change stood Marcus Cole, the human who had started everything with nothing more than words and courage, stood before a mirror in a small room behind the great hall, adjusting the strange ceremonial robes that had been made for him. The fabric was woven with threads of gold and silver, and symbols of unity were embroidered across the chest in patterns that told the story of the revolution. Marcus barely recognized himself in the reflection. The cargo hauler who had been captured seemed like a different person entirely. Someone from another life or another dream. Knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and Commander Kethis entered the room with an expression that mixed respect with something that might have been friendship. "The people are waiting," Kethis said quietly. "Are you ready?" Marcus let out a long breath and turned away from the mirror. "I never wanted this," he admitted. "I never planned to become a ruler of any kind." Kethis nodded slowly and walked to stand beside the human. "I know," the commander said, "and that is exactly why they chose you. Anyone who truly desires power is not worthy of wielding it." Marcus considered these words and found truth in them. "I am afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that I will fail them, that I will become just another tyrant in a long line of tyrants." Kethis placed one of his 4 hands on Marcus's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "Then let that fear guide you," he said. "Let it remind you every day of what you are fighting against. The moment you stop being afraid of power is the moment you become dangerous." Marcus looked at his unlikely friend and felt grateful for his presence. "Will you stand beside me in there?" he asked. "Always," Kethis replied without hesitation. They walked together through the corridors of the Hall of Echoes, past servants who bowed and warriors who saluted and species from a dozen worlds who cheered as they passed. The great hall itself was packed with more beings than Marcus could count. A sea of faces in every color and shape imaginable at the far end of the room, on a platform that had been built to replace the old thrones. A council of representatives waited to perform the ceremony. There were former servants and reformed warriors and ambassadors from the newly liberated worlds, all standing together in a way that would have been unthinkable. Just 1 year ago, Marcus walked through the crowd toward the platform, and the hall fell silent with anticipation when he reached the steps. He turned and looked out at the countless beings who had gathered to witness this moment. "I stand before you not as a conqueror," he began in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "but as a servant of the people who fought and died to create this new world. I did not free you because you were always free. Free in your hearts and minds, even when chains bound your bodies. All I did was remind you of that truth and give you the courage to act on it." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd, and Marcus continued. "Rin was the first to show me what the Volturi servants truly were beneath the masks they wore for their masters. He was brave and kind and hopeful, and he paid for that hope with his life. I carry his memory with me every day, and I promise you that his sacrifice will never be forgotten." Many in the crowd who had known Rin or heard his story wiped tears from their eyes. Today you ask me to lead you as your emperor, Marcus said. And I will accept this honor on one condition. The hall grew even more quiet as everyone waited to hear what the human would demand. I will lead only as long as I serve the people, and not myself, Marcus declared. The moment I fail in this duty, you must have the power to remove me. No ruler should be above the law, not even an emperor. Especially not an emperor. The council members on the platform exchanged glances and then nodded their agreement. One of them, an elderly female Valkyrie who had spent 50 years as a servant before the revolution, stepped forward with a crown in her hands. It was not the heavy golden crown of the old high lords, but something simpler. A circlet of silver set with stones from every world in the new coalition. Marcus Cole of Earth. She spoke in a voice that trembled with emotion. By the will of the people and the blessing of the stars, I name you Velcor Ascendant, first emperor of the reformed dominion, protector of the free peoples, and servant of all. She placed the crown upon his head, and the hall erupted in cheers that shook the ancient stones. Marcus stood with the weight of 1,000 worlds on his shoulders and felt a peace he had not known since leaving his home so long ago. He raised his hands for silence, and when the crowd finally quieted, he spoke his final words as a free man. Let this day mark the beginning of a new era, he said. An era where no being is born into chains and no species stands above another. We will face challenges ahead because the old ways do not die easily, and there are those who will fight to bring back what was lost. But as long as we stand together, as long as we remember why we fought, we cannot be defeated. This is my promise to you, and I will keep it until my last breath. The crowd cheered again, and Marcus let the sound wash over him like a wave. Later that evening, after the celebrations had begun and the dignitaries had offered their congratulations, Marcus found himself alone on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The towers that had once seemed so cold and imposing now sparkled with lights from 1,000 celebrations. Music drifted up from the streets below where servants and warriors danced together under the stars. Kethis found him there and stood beside him in comfortable silence. There is a human vessel approaching the planet, Kethis said eventually. Earth has finally sent a diplomatic mission. Marcus laughed softly and shook his head in wonder. They must be confused, he said. They sent out cargo haulers and got back an emperor. What will you tell them? Kethis asked. Marcus thought about his home, about the blue planet he had not seen in over a year, about the life he had left behind when his ship drifted into Valkyrie space. I will tell them the truth, he decided, that I found something worth fighting for, and that I cannot leave until the job is done. Perhaps one day I will see Earth again, but not today and not for many years to come. He turned to face Kethis with a tired smile on his face. They really should have just killed me. You know, he said. Quiet Lycus made a sound that might have been a laugh. I suggested it several times, the commander admitted. But fate had other plans. Indeed it did. Marcus agreed. He looked up at the stars that had been his prison and were now his responsibility, somewhere out there. Countless worlds were waking up to their first day of freedom. Children who would have been born into servitude would now grow up with the chance to become anything they wanted. The scars of 10,000 years would take time to heal, but the healing had finally begun. Come, Marcus said as he turned away from the view. There is work to do. Kethis nodded and followed his emperor back into the hall, where the council was already gathering to discuss the challenges of building a new civilization. The story of Marcus Cole, the human prisoner who became an emperor, would be told for generations to come. But Marcus knew that the real story was not about him at all. It was about the millions of beings who had found the courage to demand their freedom. It was about Rin, who had given his life for a dream he would never see. It was about the power of an idea that could not be contained by chains or cells or empires. It was about hope, and hope, as the universe was learning, was the most human thing of all.